Before watching this video, make sure that you have read the section on page 240 talking about the League of Nations attempts at disarmament in the 1920s. Now we're going to think about how successful the League of Nations attempts at disarmament were in the 1920s. So let's have a look at this scale. On this scale, what would 0 represent and what would 10 represent in terms of success? You probably thought 0 would be not at all successful, whereas 10 would be completely successful. Okay, so far so good, but now I want you to imagine that the scale is balanced on a central pivot, like a seesaw, something like this. This is Bob the baby. Now we can move Bob from one side of the scale to the other. If we move him all the way to not at all successful, we can see that the scale changes its balance. The scale is not balanced at all. We have only thought about the things that are not successful about the League of Nations attempts at disarmament. Whereas if we move him all the way to the completely successful side, again our scale is not in any way balanced. But the thing is, the League of Nations in the 1920s was not completely successful nor completely unsuccessful at disarmament. It's somewhere in the middle, much like everything else in history. It's in that funny grey area between two extremes. We might think that most of the League's attempts were successful, but not all of them, but most of them. So we could say that it's very successful. In this way, we see that most of the balance tips towards success, but it doesn't go all the way. If we think that it's still successful, but not quite as successful as that, we might say that it's reasonably successful. Similarly, we could go the other way. On our scale here, 5 is the exact halfway point, but we might move it down to not very successful, maybe 3 out of 10 in terms of success. So the scale can go either way. What I want you to do now is to think about the successes and the failures of the League of Nations attempts at disarmament in the 1920s. This is a very typical IGCSE history style question. How successful were the League's attempts at disarmament in the 1920s? And you'll see on the screen here that this is a structure that you could use to answer your question. The first paragraph prompts you to look at some success in the attempts at disarmament, and then asks you to give an example of success. The second paragraph shows the other side of the argument, trying to balance it up, to show how the League experienced some failures in its attempts as well. The third and final paragraph is an overall judgment. On this, you need to decide what you think. How successful is it? Since you've shown that there are some successes and some failures, it can't be either completely successful nor a complete failure. So it needs to be somewhere in the middle. You need to decide exactly what word is most appropriate to describe that success, and then explain why you think it is that successful.